Let's move on to talk about some concerns about eco-taxes, because while they do seem like they're a good idea, right? We said they're either going to be incentive in nature or they're going to be fiscal in nature. Fiscal in nature means that we've raised some money and we can use it for something to benefit the environment. And incentive means we've moved away from something that's bad for the environment. But just because there's good outcomes with eco-taxes doesn't mean that it's a panacea, and there's definitely concerns over eco-taxes. So let's talk about those. So what are our concerns? And one really big concern is that these eco-taxes are going to be reasonably regressive in nature. So they're going to be relatively regressive taxes. So we need to explain what we mean by regressive taxes. Some of you already have seen this because you took public policy, but regressive taxes are indeed problematic. So when we talk about a regressive tax, folks, we're talking about a tax that impacts the poor more than the non-poor when we look as a percent of income. And that part's important. So a regressive tax is one that impacts low-income people more than it impacts non-poor people when we look as a percent of their income. And generally, we don't like to impose regressive taxes. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we have two families, and I'm just going to give you a simple example. We have a non-poor family and we have a poor family. And let's give the non-poor family an income equal to $40,000. And let's give the poor family an income of $15,000. All right, so we have family A, we'll call it, and family B. Well, now let's give them each an electric bill. Let's say that the non-poor family pays $130 a month, which adds up to $1,560 a year. And the poor family has an electric bill of $80 a month, which is $960 a year. All right, so we have two families with different incomes, and they do have pretty different electric bills. Is it possible, guys, that poor households have kind of unusually high electric bills per square foot of housing? Is that possible? Why might that be?
Like some houses might not be insulated very well. So
you know, if you live in an older house or one that's kind of cheaply put together, you might not have one that's as well insulated. Remember, there were certain periods of time where we didn't do as well insulating houses. Fuel prices were low. We started getting a lot more conscious about them when fuel prices went up. So it's very possible that even family A could have a house that's twice as big, but they're not paying double the electric bill because they have a more modern house, better insulated. All right. Now let's say that we're imposing a carbon tax, and so electric bills might be a good place to impose that tax. So let's impose a tax of 10%. So we're going to impose a carbon tax of 10%. And we're going to impose it on both families. All right, so when we do that, guys, how much does family A pay for this tax? 10%. We're going to impose a carbon tax on their electric bills. Now, I'm not directly taxing the externality, right? I'm indirectly taxing the externality. How much would family A pay? They pay what?
13.
Okay, 13 a month. Let's do it in years. So 156 a year. Family B, how much do they pay? 96 a year. All right. Now the first thing that we need to note here, who pays more? Who pays more, guys? Who pays more? Family A or family B? All right. So we want to stop here and observe that family A pays more in tax dollars. So we've got the result that the non-poor family pays more. So does that mean the tax is not regressive? Is it regressive or not regressive? Can I make a judgment on this right here? No, why not? I need to look at what? I need to look at the tax relative to income, right? So here's a tax where family A pays more, the non-poor family pays more. And we want to be very clear. This doesn't make it not regressive. That's really awkwardly worded, but you understand what I mean. Just because family A pays more doesn't mean this is not a regressive tax. So now what we need to do is look at relative to income. So let's look at relative to income. So what we have to do here for each family is figure out what portion of their income is going to the tax. So if I've got $156 divided by their income of $40,000, when I do the math, that gives me 0.0039, which means what percentage? 0.039%. 0.039. I'm sorry, 0.39% is what I'm trying to say. 0.39. Let me get that right. 0.39. Now guys, do the same thing for the poor family. So we've got $96 divided by 15,000 gives me 0.0064, which is 0.64%. All right, guys, so what do these numbers tell us? What do these numbers right here tell us? The poor family pays a lot more of their income, right, to the tax. Almost double, right? So the poor family pays a larger percentage of their income to the tax. That's, folks, what makes it regressive. That's what makes it regressive. So guys, on a test, if I say family A pays more in a tax in absolute dollars than family B, we know it's not regressive. What's the answer to that question? Family A pays more in tax in absolute dollars than family B, so we know the tax is not regressive. True or false? That'd be false. Everyone agree? So understand that what I have in red here, the absolute tax dollars, is not enough to tell us if this tax is regressive or not. We have to look at it as a portion of income. So guys, tell me then, if we were to impose carbon-based taxes, which might be a good idea, where might we impose them? Where are places that we can impose carbon-based taxes? So we've got electricity. Where else can we impose a carbon-based tax? Gas. Is gas going to look any different? If we did the same kind of calculations using a gas tax, do you think it's going to look any different? Why? Why is it not going to look any different?
Demand is inelastic.
Okay, well, demand is inelastic, but is that going to tell me whether or not the tax is regressive or not?
We're not looking at household.
Say that again?
We're not looking at household income.
Okay.
Buying the gas.
Well, we're looking at buying the gas. Guys, do you think poor people might drive about the same as non-poor people? Is it possible they even drive more? Why might a low-income person drive more than a non-low-income person?
They got more jobs to go to.
More jobs in proximity, that is a big issue, right? A lot of low-income households can't live near their jobs. Might they buy more gas for other reasons?
Stay warm.
Okay, stay warm, but we're talking about like gas you put in cars, not natural gas or propane. What might be another reason that a low-income household might buy more gas? What might be true about their cars?
It's older.
Would low-income families probably have older cars that have lower gas mileage? So it's even possible that a low-income person might even buy more gas. But even if that's not true, is it going to be a larger portion of their income? Sure, it is. So do you agree that just like the electricity tax that we just looked at, a gas tax is probably going to have a similar type of pattern? It's probably also going to be regressive, right? Can you think of other regressive taxes that we have that aren't tied to the environment? What's that? Tolls could be a regressive tax? For sure. What else? Any other regressive taxes you know about?
Just food tax in general.
Food tax. Food taxes. Right? Food tax is going to be a regressive tax for the same reason. Now, a wealthier person might buy more expensive food, but actually vegetables, fresh fruit is, expensive. Right? So I'm going to have a higher bill, but when you look at a proportion of my income, a low-income person's probably paying more of their income to the tax, regressive. What about taxes on medicine? Think it's going to have the same kind of effect? Property taxes, they're also regressive. So guys, in general, do we like the idea of imposing regressive taxes on people? I mean, we really like to stay away from regressive taxes. So this is going to be a little bit of a problem. If we want to impose some eco taxes, they're likely to be regressive in nature, and we're going to have to tolerate that. All right. A second concern might involve kind of public resentment. And this isn't unique to eco taxes, right? Do we agree that the public doesn't want any new taxes? People fear new taxes. So if I'm a politician and I stand up and say, okay, guys, I've got this great idea, we're going to impose carbon taxes, and this is really going to be good for the environment. What are people hearing? What people are hearing is, I'm paying another tax, and I'm already feeling a little stretched here. So even though people might care about the environment, new taxes are problematic. So how might we better sell an eco-tax when we live in a world where people resent the idea of having additional taxes, where they already feel like they're paying a lot of tax? What can we do here? What did we learn about in our first lecture?
Tax shift.
Yeah, we might try to combine it with the idea of tax shifting, right? So somebody remind me, what's tax shifting again? Sandy, what's tax shifting?
Simplest way that like I saw it was why tax something bad? I mean, why tax something good when you can tax something bad?
Yeah, let's tax less good things and tax more bad things. So let's decrease taxes, right, on good things. So we're going to decrease taxes on good things. What were those kinds of good things? What are those things that we said might be distortionary? Taxes on things like income, right? We want people to pursue making more money. That's a good thing. What else? We talked about investment. And let's increase taxes on bad things. In this case, we're talking about bad things for the environment. So we're going to look at eco-taxes. And interestingly, guys, there's an idea of what we call tax neutrality. Tax neutrality. So tell me what we mean by tax neutrality. What do you think that sounds like we're saying? Taxes are neutral. So what are we saying, Brandon?
I guess the benefits and costs are equal out.
Okay, where the benefits and the costs might be equal. How do you think that ties into tax shifting? So let's say I want to tax shift and create tax neutrality. What does it sound like we're suggesting we want to do?
Your increase in the tax on the bad things has to be equal to the decrease in the tax on the good things.
Okay, the costs and the benefits kind of need to weigh out. In other words, let's have a zero net effect on taxpayers. Now, does that mean literally every single person is going to have a zero net effect? That would be kind of difficult, right? Because we work different amounts and make different amounts. But the idea is let's have a zero net effect in general on taxpayers by increasing one tax and offsetting with a decrease in another tax. And again, as I said, this might not literally create tax neutrality for every single person, right? That would be impossible. But in general, we can use a strategy where we create tax neutrality. And I actually found a good example of this. And this is from 1991, and this was in Sweden. And Sweden generated 2.4 billion dollars from carbon taxes. So these were new carbon taxes. So they generated $2.4 billion from new carbon taxes, and they offset it with a decrease in income taxes. And I found another example in Spain. I don't have the year, so I couldn't find the year. But Spain did the same thing. They increased the motor fuels tax, so taxed gas, and decreased labor income taxes. So there's two examples. So if you're going to be that politician who says, hey, we really need to start imposing these kinds of eco-taxes, we need carbon taxes, probably the way to do it is to combine it with tax shifting, and instead of just proposing a new tax, propose a tax shift that results in something that looks like it's tax neutral. So that's an interesting idea. Other people suggest if you're going to look at trying to impose new eco-taxes, another strategy would be to start small and to increase over time. So start small and increase that tax over time. And a good example that they point to is the tax on CFCs. Now, when this tax was implemented in 1990, this tax was $3.02 per kilogram. By 1996, this tax was $11.80 per kilogram. And at that point, we had practically phased out CFCs.
What does CFC stand for?
Chlorofluorocarbons.
All right.
Chloro, it actually, just like it sounds, chlorofluorocarbons. So this was a successful strategy. And again, if we look at what we know about CFCs, it was an immediate concern. So something had to be done. We couldn't worry about being really that politically popular. If we were going to deplete our ozone layer, we needed to get moving on this. But we also know, B, substitutions were readily available. We're talking about commercial substitutions. So we were able to implement this, not get a ton of pushback to where this wasn't successful or where it was repealed. Started off small, increased it over time, gave increasingly large incentives for firms to substitute away. But this would be an example of what? A fiscal tax or an incentive tax? An incentive tax, right? So this would have worked as an incentive tax. Do you agree that things might be a little bit differently received if it's a fiscal tax? Why might that be the case? So an incentive tax, we got the right results. People substituted away. But what if this had been more of a fiscal tax, right? That would have meant substitutes weren't readily available, and so people are just paying higher prices. Why would that be received a little differently? Why would that kind of change the situation potentially? Jason, why would that change the situation?
Be raising revenue.
Well, we'd be raising revenue, which means what for firms?
Profit.
That they're profiting? I'm not sure if we want to think about it that way. CJ? So we impose a tax on firms because there's some externality, but there's not substitutes available, so it's not going to be an incentive tax. It's really going to act more like a fiscal tax.
What if a shortage occur because it's gaining revenue, so there's a more incentive to buy it all?
Would it cause a shortage? You mean people run out and buy it before the tax is implemented? Let's go back to this graph. We implemented a tax here. Was there a shortage? No. So we don't have a shortage, right? Remember, a shortage is where quantity demanded doesn't equal quantity supply, right? But here we're just in a new market equilibrium, right? So it wouldn't create a shortage. Y'all are making this a little bit more complicated than I want this question to be, but guys, let's say we implement a tax on CFCs. There's not substitutes available, so it doesn't serve as an incentive tax where they cut away from CFCs, and instead it really acts more like a fiscal tax. Why might that kind of change the palatability of this tax?
Because the businesses would eat the tax.
Yeah, because the businesses would be eating that tax, right? And there might be some ability to pass it forward. Remember, if it's a fiscal tax, then what do we know? Most likely demand is what? If we impose a tax on CFCs and there are no substitutes for CFCs, and we decide this serves as a fiscal tax, what does that tell us? Elasticity demand must have been what? Relatively inelastic, which means what? Is the producer able to pass the tax forward
Yes.
or not?
Yes.
They're going to be able to tax push more of that tax forward to consumers. So we're taxing the producers, but they don't have the ability to substitute away. And we've got something that's really acting more like a fiscal tax, which means consumers are more inelastic in their demand, which means the tax is getting passed to them and consumers are paying the bill for this, right? So a little different than what really happened with CFCs, where commercial standards changed, firms found new ways to produce things. Instead, the opposite case, that tax gets passed forward to consumers. So sometimes consumers take the hit indirectly, right? We can impose a tax on producers, but that doesn't mean the producers are paying it, and we need to remember that, right? If it acts like a fiscal tax, it's being eaten by the consumers anyway, right? Even though it wasn't directly imposed on consumers. So don't lose sight of that, okay? All right. The next thing, what is this, number 3 on our list? Third concern about eco-taxes is that there could be some impacts, both regionally and on certain industries. So let's think about rural areas. And let's keep it simple. Let's say we're talking about a carbon tax, just so we can be concrete. Let's say we're thinking about a carbon tax. Are there ways, guys, that rural areas are going to be hit harder than non-rural areas? So people that live in rural areas are hit harder? What might be the connection there? Madison, what might be a connection here?
Let's drive further.
All right, so people drive further, which means what? More gas, which means more tax. Okay, so drive more. Keep in mind that there's less mass transit in those areas. Jobs are farther. So there's a number of reasons that they might be proportionally more largely impacted, right? That makes sense. What about northern states versus southern states? Any way that people in northern states might find themselves hit a little harder than those of us in southern states? What was that? It's cold, right? So they have colder weather. They need more heat just to stay comfortable. And so if you're in a colder climate and you need more heat, then you're obviously going to use more electricity. And you're going to pay more tax. So there might be some inequities there. What about the Midwest? For example, West Virginia. Is they're technically part of the Midwest, Why might West Virginia have some concerns about implementation of a carbon tax? If you were the politician from West Virginia, are you going to be saying, woo, let's do this? What's the problem here?
Coal.
Where does our coal come from? The Midwest, West Virginia, other areas in the Midwest. So these are our coal producing regions. What's the connection? What does coal have to do with this? It's carbon, right? It's a carbon-based fuel. When do we use it, guys?
Electricity.
Everyone's aware that we burn coal to generate electricity. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have no idea what happens when they turn the little light switch on or put their plug in, right? They have no idea what's really going on. Now, do we generate electricity in other ways? What are some of the other ways we generate electricity? Wind. What else?
Water.
Hydro, water. Solar. We have natural gas.
There's fusion and fission.
What was that?
Nuclear.
Nuclear. So nuclear. I think we have a nuclear power plant about an hour from here, right? So there are other ways that we do generate energy, but do we do a lot of that here in this country? No, we really don't. And interestingly, guys, are there other countries that do a lot better job of generating energy from sources other than coal? Yeah, there are. You go to Costa Rica, they are 100%, I think just very recently became 100% sufficient in energy, most of which is green. That's incredible, right? Costa Rica, what do we know about them? Is that a rich country? No, not a rich country. But yet they are way, way outpacing us in terms of their protection of the environment. It's pretty incredible. So we're still burning coal. Now, guys, have we made some progress there? What kind of progress? Those of you in science probably know this. What kind of progress have we made? Sandy, Brandon? What kind of progress have we made?
Clean coal.
Yeah, we have cleaner burning coal. Yeah, econ major, very impressive. So we burn cleaner coal in a lot of areas, but it's still coal, right?
It's clean.
But it's cleaner, right? So West Virginia, Kentucky, trying to think what else, Wyoming, I think. Big producers of coal, they're all going to be in that same situation. So what would happen if we impose these carbon taxes, guys? Is there going to be some downsizing in the coal industry? Right? If these taxes are high enough, we're going to get people to do some substituting, right? We're going to create incentives for people to think more about solar and hydro and wind. And that's going to displace people in these industries, right? Now, I'm not saying it dies, because we're going to be burning coal for a long time, I think, but we're going to see some shifting away from coal. And that's a good thing, but it doesn't come without some costs, right? It doesn't come without some costs. So it's important that when we think about green taxes, when we think about these eco-taxes, we want to be very clear that they're not a panacea. And when I say, what was that?
I was just saying, what does that mean?
A panacea, what does it mean when we say something's a panacea?
Solves everything.
Yeah, it solved everything, it's a perfect solution, right? It's not a panacea, it's not a perfect solution. We really need to think about this as a bit of a trade-off. Now, I'm not saying we don't want to do this. I'm not saying we don't want carbon-based fuels. What I'm saying is that the economists have to be at the table saying, okay, this is great. We probably need carbon-based fuels. There are going to be some rig benefits, but there's also going to be some costs that we want to think about. So when we think about the trade-off, the benefits of these eco-taxes are what? So the science people need to tell us what?
Cost of what?
What are the benefits when we impose these eco-taxes?
Environment gets better.
Okay, so increase environmental protection. We decrease activities that are damaging. And the economists need to say, you know what, that's all great. We need to do that. These are really important things that we want to think about. But it's not a perfect solution. It's not a panacea, because why? There's going to be some downsides, Ryan.
The coal industry is gonna take a huge hit.
Yeah, we're going
Lose a lot
to
of jobs.
see certain industries hurt. And is that problematic, guys? Do we protect things because of jobs in industry?
Yeah.
Sometimes we do, sure, right? Think about quotas on sugar to protect our farmers. But we also need to realize new jobs will be created, right? If we're going to use less coal, we need more solar, we need more hydro, and there's going to be shifts. So we don't want to say, hey, that in and of itself is problematic, but the problem is that we do see some correlations with certain states or regions. So are those costs going to be distributed the same for everybody? No. There's going to be certain states and certain geographic regions hit harder. So the costs aren't necessarily spread out evenly. Some areas will have really no costs associated with this, other than having more expensive fuel. And some could take some much bigger hits. What other things do we say? What other problems are we introducing? We're going to have to be willing to accept more regressive taxes, right? So we're going to have to accept more regressivity. Guys, are there some social justice issues tied to that? Sure. So wrapped up in this discussion of regressive taxes, we have to be thinking about social justice issues, fairness issues, equity issues. So do you see why maybe it's been harder for us to get anywhere with imposing carbon-based taxes? We're kind of behind the 8 ball, right? Compared to a lot of our industrialized counterparts, we're a little behind on imposing these kinds of taxes. But hopefully you see part of it is political. It's not a panacea. There's trade-offs. We're imposing costs on people and we have to be willing to accept that, right? And so when you stand up in Congress and you're that person that's trying to roll out that carbon tax bill, other people are saying what? Hey, you're creating regressive taxes. That's really unfair. We're creating new taxes. We're already taxing a lot. People are already having trouble. The middle class is already struggling. So clearly this isn't going to impede progress a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see in the next decade if we make any progress on imposing some real substantial green taxes on ourselves, because we have not been successful so far. So who knows? I don't know. All right, so guys, we are done with the topic of green taxes, and it's important that you know the articles. Please make sure, guys, as you read articles, you can connect them to class. Why did I assign it? Why did I assign it in this unit? How does it tie into the topics we've been talking about? Next class period, we're going to move on to public goods. It'll be also highly graphical, and you're going to want your colored pens. All right. You guys have a great fall break.